Hospitals of Australia already operates 2 hospitals in the Hunter region, Lingard at Merewether and the Warners Bay Private Hospital. They have long had their eye on the Maitland area as a possible site for a 3rd. Today, representatives from Hospitals of Australia met with the new Secretary of the Health Department and discussed the possibility of a new private hospital for Maitland.
Mr Rosser indicated that he would certainly be interested in looking at any proposal to construct a private hospital at Maitland. However, it would need to be considered on a needs-required basis. And by that, of course, he means that he's looking to the fact that the shortage of beds in the area has been evidenced, and that there is, in fact, the need for more beds, and especially private beds.
The next step for the company is to organise for a detailed feasibility study to be done. Mr Leonard says it's likely that the company will model the hospital on its Warners Bay institution. It's likely to be primarily a surgical hospital with between 80 and 100 beds. But the type of hospital will depend primarily on the needs of the area identified in the feasibility study.
Well, the type of beds that are required in the area is very important, and things we would be looking at is the requirement, for example, surgical beds, obstetric bed requirements, medical beds, psychiatric requirements. So you need to construct a private hospital specifically around the type of beds that would be necessary to be built.
A senior advisor to the Catholic Church, Tadeusz Mazowiecki, and 2 others greeted Lech Wałęsa as they visited the occupied Lenin shipyard today. Church delegates were also sent to strikers in Nova Huta to try to find a formula for talks between strike leaders and the government. The church said today Poles are frightened by what is happening, and the church's intervention is significant because it has tremendous influence over the strikers, and that influence is respected by the government.
It's not easy. But we must try.
It certainly won't be easy. A pro-strikers march in Warsaw last night got the usual tough response. On Polish television tonight, government spokesman Jerzy Orban called the Gdansk strikers worse than thugs, saying they are threatening to kill workers who refuse to join the strike. Orban added that Wałęsa has overstepped the bounds of civilized behavior. Neither side appears to be at all realistic about what the other would accept. Still, the church intervention could be the first glimmer of hope since the standoff began. David Ensor, ABC News, in the Gdansk shipyards.
Thick clouds of smoke and toxic gases rose from the site of the blast. A plant that makes an oxidizer used in the solid fuel system of the space shuttle. 4 explosions destroyed the plant. Also, a nearby candy factory knocked out windows and doors for miles around and shook Las Vegas 10 miles away. A plant spokesman said a piece of equipment failed and caught on fire. Evacuation was started, then came the explosions. The town of Henderson, 25,000, was ordered evacuated because of the danger of poisonous gases. The highway to Las Vegas was choked with cars. Late today, many of the plant's employees were still unaccounted for. A rescuer said finding everyone would take the rest of the day and night.
In tonight's news, live Mirage fighter ammunition found in the possession of students at a Newcastle school. Army personnel say the shells could easily have been detonated with devastating results.
For all the news, join us tonight at 6.
The Soil Conservation Service will use the results of public surveys and coastal engineering advice to draw up a landscape design for reclamation of the headland. decision to appoint the service was based on their expertise in coastal management and their backing from the Public Works Department and the University of Sydney. The landscape plan will be ready for public comment within a month, and Council predicts the finished project will rival anything on the Australian coastline.
Well on that occasion.
Newcastle has 6 wins and 6 losses at this stage of the season and are sitting midfield on the NBL table. On the other hand, North Melbourne is in 3rd place with 9 wins from 13 games. The last time these sides met earlier in the season in Melbourne, the Falcons lost by just 10 points.
But if we play to our best, we can win this game. And of course, if we do, I think it'll put us into the 6 for the first time and give us a legitimate shot at trying to stay there for the rest of the year. So it is a big one, and I think also it's a must-win game. I don't think, even though they're a top team, I don't think this is a game that we can afford to let slip.
What went through your mind when Peter Hill threw that magnificent shot last week?
Well, exactly what went through my mind was it's about time we got a decent break. You know, it's been about 6 or 7 games, and I haven't felt that we'd had a lucky break, and then we finally got one. And I really think that was the catalyst for the players to say, thank goodness, you know, maybe we've turned the corner. Not so much, the 3 points were very helpful, obviously, but more than that, I think everybody felt that suddenly the luck may have turned back, and it plays a big part in sport, and players get quite superstitious, so maybe that might turn out to be the biggest break of the year.
Okay then, Ken.
Thank you.
For many of Newcastle's Aboriginal people, it was a peaceful time for reflection at Horseshoe Beach. They gathered with black wreaths attached to foam and in a symbolic gesture threw them out to sea. Like many Aboriginals around Australia, they see the Bicentenary as a year of mourning, and far from seeing the First Fleet reenactment as something to celebrate, they see it as the beginning of the desecration of traditional Aboriginal life.
We feel that because of the reenactment, 200-year reenactment by the non-Aboriginal people of Australia was the beginning of the end for Aboriginal culture, and today was a symbolic gesture for all our traditional Aboriginal people who were in control of the land up until 200 years ago.
Spectators were already assembling on vantage points around the harbour at first light today, despite heavy fog which blanketed the fleet's arrival. As if on cue, the curtain of fog lifted to reveal the fleet assembled in line behind flagship Eye of the Wind, making good headway towards the harbour. This is the fleet's 15th port of call in Australia, but once again the spectacle was every bit as exhilarating as in Sydney, Hobart, Adelaide and Melbourne. By the time the fleet passed Nobbies into the harbour, the accompanying vessels expanded into a flotilla as craft of every description bid welcome to a fleet that continues to capture the imagination of 13-month sailing from London. As expected, the fleet wasn't warmly received by all onlookers. Protesters carrying the Aboriginal flag joined the procession in kayaks. Police say they observed requests to stay outside the Channel marker buoys. By the time the first vessels moored at lee wharves, the feeling of celebration was everywhere. Newcastle's own marching koalas providing an enthusiastic reception. It's this unwavering support for the First Fleet reenactment, long after the Australia Day highlight in Sydney, that's giving organisers new hope for the financially burdened project. The arrival in Newcastle is especially important to project founder Jonathan King.
Not only will we catch up with the Queen again, she farewelled us from Portsmouth about a year ago, and she'll be saluting us tomorrow when she sails past, and we'll be returning the salute, manning the yards. But secondly, from Newcastle on, we hope to break even financially. From now on, the ships of the First Fleet are chock-a-block with passengers for the rest of their time in Australia.
Did you expect that to happen?
Well, we hoped that eventually the message would get through to the people that this is the longest running, largest bicentennial event now that we've had in Australia, and if they want to be part of it, then they're running out of time. And
due to the huge demand for passage, only one person will remain with the fleet for the entire journey around Australia.
Trip around Australia?
Joan Pecker from Canada.
I wanted to see Australia, and I didn't want to go on a guided tour. And this is an excellent way. We've had stopovers in all the major cities and side trips in between.
The fleet will be open for public inspection from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. tomorrow and Sunday. Its next port of call will be Brisbane for Expo, then back to Sydney. The fleet will disband 16 months after leaving Portsmouth, having covered 50,000 kilometres and carried more than 2,000 passengers.
The dawning realisation that the roof wouldn't fit came after several frustrating hours and several attempts to position it. When efforts failed, the fiberglass sections were taken away for adjustments. At that stage, it was hoped the canopy would be ready to top the tower today, in time for the Queen's visit tomorrow morning. According to Town Clerk Barry Lewis, that's just not possible. He says there are misalignment problems which can't be properly rectified in time. According to Mr. Lewis, there are 4 positions where the roof should bolt onto the steel tower. He says 2 fit, 2 don't. The roof isn't expected to be fitted now until next week. Glass Tech Industries, who made the roof, say they don't know if they're to blame. They plan to take new measurements.
Some major changes have been made to the Knights, who went down to St George last week. Kiwi international Adrian Shelford has been rushed into the team. He arrives from a stint in England tomorrow morning. He will be whisked from Sydney Airport to Newcastle for his first training run with the Knights. Other inclusions are Graham Foster on the wing and Mark Glanville to lock. South Sydney is a side brimming with stars, including Blake, Fennick, Davidson, Boyle, Coleman and O'Neill. Footy Tab has given the Knights a 7.5-point start, but with the home crowd advantage, Newcastle could win.
The graduation is held in 3 parts to accommodate all the graduands. The Griffith Duncan Theatre was packed when 360 students received their awards this morning. While the faces changed, the ceremony is almost identical to the first held 40 years ago. For the students, the diploma, degree or certificate is the culmination of years of work. This year's graduation is the largest in the Institute's history, numbers swelled by the diversification into areas other than teaching. For the first time, nursing graduates were amongst those receiving diplomas, as well as social administration and communications students. In recognition of the first intake of communications students, the guest speaker was Deirdre O'Connor, chairman of the Australian Broadcasting Tribunal. But a graduation ceremony is not all presentations and speeches, as 2 college students showed. Here at Williamtown RAAF base and along the route between Newcastle and the base, crowds were lining up well before the Queen and Duke were due to appear. For some, a first taste of royalty, for others, another farewell.
This is the 4th time that I've been to see the Queen. I'm very proud to be here.
I didn't think I'd be able to see her.
Have you seen her before?
No. and Charles and Di.
What are you going to do when you see her?
Cheer. Wave me flag.
Finally, the flag-waving moment came as the Royal Cavalcade swept onto the airport tarmac. As per Royal Protocol, the Governor of New South Wales, Sir James Rowland, was on hand to farewell Her Majesty from New South Wales soil. With the royal party still behind schedule, there was no time for the crowd-pleasing informal walks. So, after final farewells to New South Wales dignitaries, the royal couple boarded the Air Force VIP 707, pausing only for the traditional farewell wave to the assembled crowd. Then, with a roar of engines, the royal visit to New South Wales was over. Next stop for Her Majesty, Canberra. Newcastle's Lord Mayor John McNaughton says the visit was a resounding success.
It was, in every consideration, it was very, very successful, and they were very pleased about it.
And there were no major catastrophes during the day?
There were no major ones. There was a minor one that I could tell you a little about, but I tore my trousers on the way out between the customs house and the car on the emblem on the front of the Lord Mayoral car, and that's why I had to leave my robe on during lunch, because my knee was hanging out of my trousers.
Did the Royals know about that?
Yes, they did. Over lunch we told them. The Duke thought it was a huge joke. He laughed and laughed about it.
The service began early today with an assembly at Christchurch Cathedral. The Battle of the Coral Sea represented a turning point in the Japanese advance during World War II, and its anniversary provides an occasion for the Navy to reflect on sacrifices made throughout the course of the war. This year, the crew of HMAS Brisbane joined the parade along Hunter Street to Civic Park, their colour party leading the way to the strains of the Police Citizens Youth Club pipes and drums. Also in the procession, Royal Australian Navy Reserve cadets from Training Station Tobruk, and of course Navy veterans, among them survivors of the Coral Sea encounter, the crew of HMAS Hobart. The Reverend Robert Tate, an Australian who spent 26 years with the Royal Navy, conducted the Civic Park service, recalling the tragedy of war and the cost in human lives. Captain Rob Walls of HMAS Brisbane reflected on the historic consequences of that great battle.
The Battle of the Coral Sea was one of the most important battles that our country's been involved in.
More than 30 military and civilian groups were represented at the wreath-laying, led by Naval Association President Peter Kennedy Murray and official representative of the US government, Colonel Terry Wallace. Over the past 5 years, the Newcastle commemorative service has expanded, and a spokesman for the Naval Association says it now rivals Sydney as a focus for this military tradition.
Most money for the event was on the Laurie Lawrence train, Jodie Clackworthy of Brisbane. However, Donna's local coach, Eric Arnold, didn't agree. He was super confident that Donna would win the event and break the Commonwealth record as well. He was right on both counts, as the Merriweather 18-year-old led all the way to break the Commonwealth and Australian records and go under the Olympic qualifying time by more than 7 seconds.
And she's coming into a great time. 52 is the qualifying time. Have a look at this. 45. Sensational performance. She's off to Seoul.
New Commonwealth record.
Clackworthy with a 49. She's off to Seoul. What a great performance. Proctor has broken the Commonwealth record and a trip to Seoul. And there she goes, giving Clackworthy with a red cap a hug. She's going to Seoul as well.
The swim automatically qualifies Donna for the Australian team to compete in this year's Olympic Games in Seoul. The time is the second fastest recorded in the world this year. The only faster time is by triple world record holder Janet Evans of the United States.
And believe it or not, the 15-year-old...
Hundreds of rural producers, townsfolk and school students took time out today to head to Tocal Agricultural College. The attraction, day one of the Small Farms Field Days.
For all the news, join us tonight at 6.
Two skydivers from the club, Scott McConaughey and Paul Stanley, will be attempting to break the Australian record for the most number of jumps in a day. In the process, they're hoping to raise $50,000 for autistic children. The record attempt will be held at the club's Elderslie airstrip in November, when both skydivers hope to make at least 100 jumps, well above the current record of 70.
We've got about 16 hours of daylight, and we don't particularly want to do the jumps at night time. Time is one, and just whether or not we're going to be able to physically keep up the effort involved. Because I mean, the amount of adrenaline you have floating around in your bloodstream, when you do one jump, you multiply that by 100, and I'll probably be gibbering wrecks by the end of the day.
Any special training you're going to have to do for the jumps?
Well, both Scott and I are going to go, doing gym work and give up smoking and cut down on the drinking, and I mean, basically the jumping is just no different to what we'll be doing here, but just more of it.
Lotto's Karen Penny was also out at Elderslie. Not only is Karen playing a big part in the fundraising, the television personality also made her first free fall jump today. The Capita Challenge is one of Australia's richest men's singles tournaments, with prize money in excess of $60,000. The local lineup featured bowlers from the Central Coast to Nelson Bay and west to the Upper Hunter. Amongst the bowlers in action were Cohiba's Darby Ross, who represented Australia at the recent world titles in New Zealand, state players Bob Fishlock of Hamilton and Bob King of Cohiba, and Jack High contestant Barry Salter of the host club Beresfield. The 44 players faced 2 knockout rounds, each game 25 shots up. The final 11 now progress to the sectional playoffs in Sydney next month for a chance at one of 10 New South Wales finalist spots. The eventual winner of the rich tournament will take home $8,500.
The State Health Department had intended to move a group of developmentally disabled people into this home at New Lambton, but a protest by local residents means that now won't happen.
For all the news, join us tonight at 6.
Lifesavers may have won a major concession from the state government in their campaign for workers' compensation. The Lifesavers won compensation cover similar to that provided for other volunteer rescue groups.
For all the news, join us tonight at 6.
By 10:30 this morning, most of Newcastle's buses were stationary. More than 200 drivers gathered to discuss what they say are problems with running times. According to the drivers, they're having to drive too fast to fit in with urban transit authority schedules. They say ultimately public safety could be at risk.
Drivers are now being asked to drive faster to achieve the given timetables. They're saying that's not safe and that the timetable should be increased and extended so that they have adequate time to complete their journeys and also adequate time to recover at the end of the trip.
The union is also concerned at unconfirmed reports that the new state government is considering selling the public bus service to private enterprise.
We're very worried about it, and a deputation is going to be sought to the Minister to either confirm or deny that.
And I mean, what impact would that have if